How should Christians treat their enemies? This is a question that God's people have always been asking. And so, while the Psalms must be interpreted in light of the New Testament, the answer they give to this question is not outdated. It's not irrelevant. And so, we can seek an answer to that question from Psalm 35. To do so, we want to ask a couple additional questions. First of all, who are these enemies that we're asking about? Well, David tells us in verses 19 and 7 that they are wrongfully our foes, who hate us without cause. So these aren't simply ideological opponents or those who critique our ideas. They aren't siblings who don't always play nice with us. These are people who, for no reason, have chosen to become enemies of God and of His people. And they oppose with a vengeance. They are, in verse 11, malicious witnesses who repay evil for good. Verse 12 and verse 4. So we need to identify who these enemies are. They aren't the people across our neighbors across the street whose property is bringing our property values down. Not somebody who cut us off in traffic. No, these are deliberate, hostile enemies of God, His people, and everything they stand for. The second question is this: how should we engage such enemies? And perhaps the answer from this Old Testament book will surprise us. But the first answer that David gives us is we're to love them. David says, I was good to my enemies. He grieved over their sicknesses. He prayed and fasted for their well-being. I mean, we may hardly do that for friends or loved ones, but David did such for his enemies. He treated them, as he says in verse 14, as he would a friend, a brother, or a mother. So, first of all, we're to love our enemies according to the pattern that this Old Testament saint David sets for us. Second, we are to pray for justice. David isn't asking God for a favor to be sort of malicious toward his enemies, to do something extraordinary against these people. He's simply asking God to judge his enemies fairly, to treat them according to their own actions. And so in verse 3, these enemies pursued David, so evidently that is part of their worldview, something they approve of, something they agree with, pursuing people. Now God will pursue them, as verse 6 says. The wicked hid a net for the righteous. Now they will fall into it themselves, verse 8. So David says to the Lord, Lord, exercise justice. Right? I'm not asking for a favor. I'm not asking you to be malicious. Just exercise justice. Be fair. Be equitable with regard to the actions of these enemies. A final question we might ask about this psalm is this: how is God answering Psalm 35? So Psalm 35 is in the Old Testament, so it's anticipatory. It's looking ahead to the further outworking of God's plan. So how has God acted upon what we see in Psalm 35? Well, I want to reflect on just two things with you before we read this psalm. Number one, He sent Jesus to show us how to love our enemies. So Jesus, for example, in the Sermon on the Mount, teaches us this, Matthew 5:44, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. So this wasn't just something that David did. God, in Jesus, teaches us to pray for and to love our enemies. And Jesus modeled this himself as he's crucified, as nails have been driven into his hands and feet. He prays this: Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So he has sent Jesus to show us how to love our enemies. And then second, he has reaffirmed his pledge to send Jesus again as judge. Jesus will put all of his enemies and ours under his feet. And this is why, friend, it is not only wrong, but petty to seek personal vengeance. If Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is coming in glory and majesty to judge all of his enemies, to put his enemies under his feet, he certainly doesn't need any help from us. Our calling is to love our enemies and to pray that God would do what he has promised he will do. With these thoughts in mind, let's listen to Psalm 35. Of David. Contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler and rise for my help. Draw the spear and javelin against my pursuers. Say to my soul, I am your salvation. Let them be put to shame and dishonor who seek after my life. Let them be turned back and disappointed who devise evil against me. Let them be like chaff before the wind, with the angel of the Lord driving them away. Let their way be dark and slippery, with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. For without cause they hid their net for me. Without cause they dug a pit for my life. Let destruction come upon him when he does not know it. And let the net that he hid ensnare him. Let him fall into it to his destruction. Then my soul will rejoice in the Lord, exulting in his salvation. All my bones shall say, O Lord, who is like you, delivering the poor from him who is too strong for him, the poor and needy from him who robs him. Malicious witnesses rise up. They ask me of things that I do not know. They repay me evil for good. My soul is bereft. But I, when they were sick, I wore sackcloth. I afflicted myself with fasting. I prayed with head bowed on my chest. I went about as though I grieved for my friend or my brother. As one who laments his mother, I bowed down in mourning. But at my stumbling, they rejoiced and gathered. They gathered together against me. Wretches whom I did not know tore at me without ceasing. Like profane mockers at a feast, they gnash at me with their teeth. How long, O Lord, will you look on? Rescue me from their destruction, my precious life from the lions. I will thank you in the great congregation. In the mighty throng I will praise you. Let not those rejoice over me who are wrongfully my foes, and let not those wink the eye who hate me without cause. For they do not speak peace, but against those who are quiet in the land they devise words of deceit. They open their mouths against me. They say, Aha, aha, our eyes have seen it. You have seen, O Lord. Be not silent, O Lord, be not far from me. Awake and rouse yourself for my vindication. For my cause, my God and my Lord, vindicate me, O Lord my God, according to your righteousness, and let them not rejoice over me. Let them not say in their hearts, Aha, our heart's desire. Let them not say, We have swallowed him up. Let them be put to shame and disappointed altogether who rejoice at my calamity. Let them be clothed with shame and dishonor who magnify themselves against me. Let those who delight in my righteousness shout for joy and be glad and say evermore, Great is the Lord, who delights in the welfare of his servant. Then my tongue shall tell of your righteousness and of your praise all the day long. May God bless Psalm 35 to help us to navigate the difficult relationships we have with those who oppose us, and give thanks to God for sending Jesus Christ to us while we were yet his enemies, to be gracious to us and to bring us into his family.